Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Land Development Podcast. I am your host, Ryan Glick. And if this is your first time joining us, our show has a couple different types when you tune in. Some weeks when you tune in, you're going to hear an interview style show where we'll have on an individual associated with the industry, hearing about their origin story, and then digging into some of the projects and deals that they've been involved with over the years. And then other times, like today, we have an industry news theme show. And as always, joining me for these episodes is Charles Covey. Charles, thanks for joining me.
Hello.
So, coming into today, I have been on the road this morning for about 5 hours. So I've had a lot of time thinking about these articles. I actually just dropped off one of my boys at their first overnight basketball camp that they've ever done. So that was a pretty cool experience. Driving him there, dropping him off, saying goodbye, and knowing that I'll, I guess, be seeing him in a few days here and see how that goes. But
You excited?
yeah, it's pretty exciting. It's kind of funny too because he went there not really knowing anybody, and so you get those nerves and
Oh
everything.
yeah.
But then it turns out that, like most of these camps, it's 2.5 hours away from here, so it's still in the state of Iowa, and he ends up in they house him in dorms, so it's at a college,
Yeah.
and he ended up in a pod with a bunch of kids that go to a same school. And so he
Nice.
actually ended up knowing three of the kids and everything. So that was a pretty
Good for
cool
him.
experience to have that happen.
I didn't do baseball camp, but I didn't do basketball camp. I did baseball camp.
Oh,
I
nice.
remember that was such a freaking blast.
Yeah.
Loved it. I mean, that's a huge highlight.
Yeah. Well, there's something about that freedom of being able to go somewhere, have an overnight camp. You're on a college campus. You're responsible for waking yourself up,
Yeah.
heading over to the field house to get to practice, getting to breakfast and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's gonna be cool to find out how the experience was for him, or over this week and stuff. But
That's cool.
anyway, so for today, getting into the articles that we have, we're actually going to pull up 4 different articles today, mainly because I want to quickly touch on the presidential debate. And I know people have talked about this ad nauseum over the last, couple of weeks since the first presidential debate happened. But pulling up this first article here, the reason I wanted to pull this up is because coming into our conversation today in this episode, I was really interested because I couldn't remember what was highlighted in the debate related to housing. Like, were there any questions related to housing? Did anybody talk about housing or anything with the real estate industry at all? And turns out there weren't really any questions related to housing. And President Biden did say he in some of his statements, he did bring up something related to housing, but I think his message related to housing is what I really wanted to touch on because I don't personally think this is the way. But let me read from this article here. So the headline of this article says, "The first 2024 presidential debate was light on housing news." And reading from this article, in his introductory remarks, President Joe Biden came right out of the gate mentioning housing costs as an issue he wants to address if he's elected to a second term. Quote, "We're going to be able to reduce the price of housing," Biden said of a potential second term in the debate's opening moments. "We're going to make sure we build 2 million new units. We're going to make sure we cap rents so corporate greed can't take over. Corporate greed is the reason why we're in this problem right now." So I thought that was very not surprising for the statements to be said and where the blame is being pointed. And first off, I guess
Very Democrat of him.
yeah. And I just, there's obviously different philosophies on how to solve problems that are going on. And it's just so, I don't know the right word to say, so annoying and frustrating when
Yeah.
you hear politicians talking, where they place the blame. It's like we've used, he talks about rent controls, putting in rent controls and stopping the free market from operating and everything. And just hearing his approach again is not surprising, but interested in your thoughts on this one.
Well, I think we both agree, and I think most of your listeners are going to agree that putting rent controls in place will not get us more new units faster. That is probably be the opposite scenario. So that would be catastrophic. But we've got plenty of information on how these things go. Like this, rent controls are not new. I studied these in college and in econ classes. Like these are terrible for getting better product and new products. So that's fascinating, but I guess again, not completely surprising. There's not any solution that's actually viable here. It's just rhetoric, which sucks because you really would hope that at this point, with a problem this severe, that somebody is putting together something that is notable. You think about you could argue pros and cons to the Opportunity Zone program that Obama did, but it was a big program. It was pretty well planned out for the most part. That not everybody's a proponent of it, but the principle there is that you focused on areas that needed development, and you put a program in place to encourage development to happen. And it worked pretty well for the most part. Like I know a lot of areas that are in the Opportunity Zone that are getting new companies moving in because the tax benefits are notable. You could do something like that with housing. You look at the areas that need it, and you can do, whether it's a tax credit, whether it's a builder, something that the builders get versus the homeowner. Like you've got to find ways that the right people are getting the benefit to get more units. But it absolutely can be done. They need a housing czar or somebody create a new position, create a department. Like this could be solved. I don't know if I'm the guy to do it, but I definitely think we could put our heads together and come up with something that would work. So disappointing, because I think we talked about before, we really think that housing needs to be a hot button topic this campaign cycle. And for them to not lead with better information, that's disappointing. A little bit disappointed in the Trump camp for not having some more stuff about this on the website. So I think that's a miss on their part. Still think that this becomes an issue, maybe in congressional races too. Like you're going to see this come up more. We'll see. Let's watch this and see if they tweak this a little bit, and if Trump doesn't put some things out about it. But at least preliminarily, pretty disappointing from both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, agree. And I was going to mention that too, just at the end of the article talking about how there's nothing on his website related to this issue yet. So we'll see. It sounds like there's going to be a second debate, I think, and we'll see if anything comes up in that second debate, and if Joe Biden is still the one who's debating with Trump. We'll see what
We
happens.
shall
A
see.
lot could change.
A
Yes.
lot could change.
Yes. 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 All
So
right.
that'll
Let's.
be.
Yeah.
But we can still agree it's a fascinating time in American politics.
It is. It
It's
is.
like
Never a dull
what
moment.
I don't know what the hell's going on up there, but this is fascinating.
Yes, and I should mention too, for those of you listening in and not actually watching, this article came to us from Housing Wire. All right, let's jump into the second article for this episode. This article comes to us from Business Insider. Headline reads, "The End of Lumber Mania. What Seesaw Prices for Wood Tell Us About America's Economic Future." So this article here talks about the pricing that we've seen, where the price went way up back in in 2020, and then fell back down to earth a couple different times. So it kind of went up and down, like it says, seesaw prices, right? It went up and then back down to earth a little bit, then back up again, and now it's back down at a lower price. And so from the article here, the price of Western 2x4 lumber and industry benchmark shot up from under $400 per thousand board feet in January 2020 to over $1,600 in May 2021. I think we all remember that and what that did to overall prices. And then from the article again, but what comes up often comes down, and lumber prices came down hard as demand decelerated and supply ramped up to a speed that's no longer necessary. And so I think in this article, not necessarily, it's kind of a longer article here. So just the gist from the article is just around the prices have come down to a level where I think the industry is concerned about it, just because the supply is there, the demand is not there where they expected it. So they kind of got the supply back to where it needed to be. And I think one of the challenges is that, when you get into this type of situation and you're not letting the free market work, and we're constantly trying to add things to one side or the other side in order to artificially manipulate the market to get things to a certain spot for a certain, party involved, it's ultimately going to go too far one direction. And then you end up in a spot where it it's not, you're not letting the free market operate. And so it feels like at face value with this whole situation that supply like should be, they should slow down the supply and not necessarily produce as much if the demand is not there, which would allow the prices to eventually stabilize to an appropriate level where it needs to be,
Mhm.
until the demand actually says that they need the supply that they're producing right now. I don't know that that's going to happen because we have a lot of talk about people about, we need to build more units. Everybody knows we need to build more units, and so in theory, the demand should be there, but there are obviously market factors right now that are keeping the consumer from going out and actually buying the amount of supply that we're being told that we need in order to fulfill the demand that's out there right now.
Yeah, I like this article. I really appreciated the level of detail that they dove into. There's a couple of things here that I hadn't thought about previously as far as demand. If you think about lumber demand, about 75%, I think is what they said, comes from residential construction.
Yep.
Okay, so that includes not only new homes, but renovations and additions and decks and all those other types of pergolas and all the other things that you build with lumber. And an interesting element that they brought up, which I hadn't thought of, is that most people do renovations to their home in the first 2 or 3 years after they buy it. Like they move in and they do it either immediately or pretty soon after because they're jazzed up about getting their place kind of set up the way they want it. And we're not so if they're not moving, then that's not occurring. And so we're not seeing new people in an existing home that would do this project. And you're not seeing those kind of projects done very often in a new home because it's kind of already set up, right? You don't go do a big renovation to a brand new house. So the renovation and deck portion of the business is really falling off, and that's driven in large by the existing home inventory not moving, which of course is driven by interest rates. So that one was fascinating to me. If you look at new home construction, we're not going to get the COVID bump and the stuff we had in 2020 and 2021. Those factors we don't have those anymore. So I think that we're probably pretty stable for the next year or two because I don't see any dramatic. Even if they started this next quarter, we're not going to see a dramatic interest rate change. It's going to change a quarter point at a time. So we're not going to see this come back just overnight. So you still got to get probably a full point out of the interest rate, if not more, before you start to see some of that return. So we're well into 25 before the housing starts really dramatically change. Okay, so we got stability there. Now the number that we're seeing on the 25% of this that is more commercial, which would be apartments and those kind of structures, those have dropped by half or more. So that number is really getting peeled down. That's probably not changing until well into 25 or 26, maybe 27 before you see meaningful change because those projects have dropped off and it takes a long time to spool those up if nobody's putting them together. So I think it's a depressed demand for at least 24 months, if not longer.
Yeah. Do you think that, and I'm wondering if the industry is going to back off of its supply at all, or if it's going to continue as is and just expect the market to eventually catch up at some point, and whether it's in 25 or even into 2026 before it
Yeah,
finally starts to regulate.
that there's complexity to that though. So what I think is fascinating about the lumber industry is the United States is in a really good position on the raw lumber scenario. We've got tons of raw lumber and it's very inexpensive. There was a bunch of it planted in the last 20 or 30 years, bunch of mature timber. It's everywhere. And that's not hard to come by. So we can make it. They ramped up the production in the sawmills over the last half decade. Problem is now that they've got to monetize that somehow, right? So these big companies, they've all taken out a loan and they've got this stuff that they're operating. They got staff, and so even if they cut down the amount that they're putting out, their fixed costs are going to be pretty much the same. So now they're fighting with, okay, well, what do we do? Do we cut down and try to hopefully boost pricing? But if that doesn't happen, now we've reduced overall income. So from a supply demand thing, it's a very interesting conundrum that the lumber mills are in. I assume that they are reducing this where they can, But at the same time, they've got to find ways to monetize the resource that they have in front of them, which is employees and facilities and those fixed costs that they have to cover. Could see some plants shut down. I mean, if they're losing money, like this says, and we're going to see continued suppressed demand, which I think is realistic. I think it's possible that some plants shut down. Maybe they did mothball them until things pick back up. You can't operate these at a loss, at too big of a loss for too long. You can operate at a minimal loss for a while just to keep the resource going for when it does come back. But wouldn't shock me if we see some plants shut down.
Yeah, and I
That
wonder
might
too.
push prices a little bit.
Yeah, and I was gonna say one of the things at the tail end of this article, that I just don't see it changing. But they mentioned that jobs that are being quoted are not necessarily being quoted for less because lumber prices have come down.
Mhm.
It's That's not generally, you're quoting prices in a lot of situations based upon what people are willing to pay for those jobs to
Mhm.
be done. And so, if you can do a job for a higher price that what the market will actually pay for it, you're going to do it for more, even if your lumber prices or any of your raw materials are less and everything. And so just because lumber prices are coming down doesn't mean that there's necessarily going to be lower quotes on some of these jobs and that the consumer is going to end up seeing. And so I thought that was interesting to make that note in here, because that's also just that's listening to the market. I mean, what is the market willing to pay for a new deck, or what is the market willing to pay for some sort of other addition onto a house or
Yeah.
renovation? And yeah, I just don't see that changing at all.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think you're on the right track there.
All right, well, let's move on to the next article here. So we are jumping into one from let's see here, let me get this on the screen. So this comes to us from globest.com. This is the first one we've done from this site before. So the headline on this one reads, fully remote companies have higher turnover rates. So I thought this was an interesting article to bring up because we've talked in the past about just the shift from companies and of businesses to either a hybrid or a fully remote office, and what kind of impact this is going to have on the commercial real estate market. And so just understanding what this looks like for those businesses who are going fully remote, I think is interesting, because ultimately, if businesses are having a tougher time retaining talent, and being fully remote, they're going to ultimately come back to some sort of middle ground, which I think we've been seeing. But I thought this was interesting, and I don't think this allowed us to get to the full article here. I think it might be behind a membership or a paywall. So we'll get a part of the article here on the top, but I'm going to read from the article here. So CBRE has been tracking office policies for more than 340 US companies since January 2023. Now, in the middle of 2024, they've pulled together information to show some trends in what is happening within at least their sample, although it's difficult to know the degree to which this represents the country as a whole. Most organizations at this point expect employees to be in the office from 2 to 4 days a week, with 14% running with full time office attendance and 36% having employees in the office at least 3 days a week. That's half of all companies. But then 6% of companies see employees in half the time. 15% have workers at home 3 days or more a week. Another 28% make it employee choice, meaning companies have office space but no demand for employees to work there, and 1% work fully remote. So what this really told me is that they're all over the board. There's nothing standard about the
Mhm.
policies that any of these companies are setting up and how they're trying to operate. It really feels like people are trying to feel out the situation and trying to find what works. You have a lot of employees who are hopping around looking for those positions that are as flexible as possible to be able to work from home. But I think most people, and this is my personal opinion, I think most people would be fooling themselves if they think that they are going to be more productive working in a home office in a lot of these different roles that require collaboration. I've had experience in this, and I understand the type of impact it has to a team when you're not able to collaborate in real time and you're scheduling your collaboration and you can't just walk over to somebody and have a conversation with them. And so I, I just think, I don't know how long it's going to take. And we've talked about this before, that we're never going to see it go back to the, pre COVID, levels of in office or anything like that. But I do think we're going to see more hybrid with more people, um, in the office, I guess more frequently than less frequently over time.
Yeah, I was surprised at the one. They're saying 1% fully remote, and they're tracking 340 companies. I'm assuming these are large companies, Fortune 500 type companies. That fully remote number probably trends upward as you go into some of the mid market and small market companies. I think so. We have to kind of be just understand the context of the numbers. It's probably larger companies. I don't think CBRE is tracking mom and pops
Yep.
or companies under, say, even under 100 million. I don't think they probably have too many that they're tracking at that size. So these are bigger companies, and that's not surprising. One thing that's interesting with the office here is and I talk a lot about this on the content that I do on my Instagram, is that office right now as an asset class for investing is terrible, because you can really, if you're invested in an office REIT, you could be getting hammered. But according to this, the office demand is not zero, of course, and everybody is not fleeing the office, but they're definitely fleeing the wrong type of office, the type of office that they don't want and that their employees don't want. And this is also something that I've talked a lot about: the live, work, play environments, the office building that's integrated into a very immersive space that's got parks and trails and restaurants and walkability. And like, those offices are still in very high demand and are largely leased. So it's just a very interesting time in real estate to see what was a traditional, very well understood, simple asset class in office. And it literally got turned on its head, and they're trying to reinvent how the asset class gets evaluated now. So it is very fascinating to see how it shakes out, and it is still shaking out. I think, as you indicated, we don't really know where it's going to land. Nobody's ever going to see 100% of companies go fully remote. It's not realistic. The balance part, as an employer, the balance part for me is that I can understand going fully remote and accepting a little bit less overall production. Now, I fully believe you can get very close, 85%, 90% production, the same with most jobs if they're well managed. But you're okay with that 10% or 15% less production if you don't have an office expense. Now it's about a wash, or maybe even actually a positive if you don't have that very expensive high-rise office expense. But that's why I'm always asking people about their hybrid scenario. If their employer has still got the high dollar office expense and the employee's not there, that's not a great situation. So now they're getting lower production and they still got to spend that money on the high end office. That I don't think that's sustainable. So we'll see how this shakes out. But I think the dollars and cents are gonna determine how this plays out.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to mention here too, because in last week's episode number 32 with Johnny Bosworth with R&R Realty Group, their sizable portfolio that they have is 50% warehouse and 50% office space.
Mm-hmm.
And he had mentioned on that episode that they're seeing a lot of these companies that they work with not necessarily decreasing their spend on office, but reducing size, and
Mm-hmm.
then building out the size that they do retain with more amenities and perks to get people to come back
Yep.
into the office. So their
Yep.
spend isn't necessarily less. It's just a more inviting,
Yep.
smaller workspace where people are going to
Smaller
be coming in.
footprint,
Yes,
nicer. Yeah, more
e-
enticing. It's not
exactly.
it's not a cubicle farm anymore.
Yes, exactly. There's
Yeah.
there's more things there for those like to get people interested in coming back to the office in that hybrid type setting, which seems to be like it will be most likely the norm going
Mm-hmm.
forward is going to be more of a hybrid. Which I mean for for people who are whether you're parent, you have kids, you have activities, it can be more efficient to do some of those things, or more the flexibility can be beneficial for people, or even being able to travel and work while you're traveling in some cases if you have that flexibility. But at the same time, it as with everything, you're going to have, if they're not, if the the team members aren't uh, managed properly, you can start to have people who take advantage of some of those things. And I know there's at least in the tech world, there's a lot of people who moonlight and work multiple jobs at the same
Mm-hmm.
time without the other employers knowing about the multiple jobs. They're collecting 2 or 3 paychecks at a
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and they're basically stealing time from their employers because they're not, they're working multiple jobs during the hours they should be focused on one particular job. So that's a, there's trust issues and stuff there with some of these people that are doing those things. And the business is not understanding what they're actually working on. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out over the coming years.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right, well, let's jump over to our last headline for this episode. So, this headline, next one, comes to us from the National Association of Home Builders. The headline on this one reads, High New Home Inventory, What It Means for Home Building. So, reading from this article, housing economists typically advise that a balanced market inventory is a 5 to 6 month supply, meaning that is a measure of how many months it would take for that count of home inventory to be sold at the current monthly sales rate. Inventory larger than 5 to 6 month supply would suggest weaker or declining home price growth and home building activity. Lean inventory levels of less than a 5 to 6 month supply tend to lead to price growth and gains for home building activity. In the census May 2024 newly built home sales data, the current month supply of inventory is 9.3. Some analysts have noted that given the 5 to 6 month benchmark, that this means the building market for single family homes is possibly oversupplied, implying declines for construction and prices lie ahead. So I thought this was really interesting, bringing this in with some of the other articles that we've talked about previously, and even today.
Mm-hmm.
Just that, we continue to see that we need to build more, we need to build more, we need to build more. But then seeing this article, and based on the census that they did just a couple months ago from when we're recording this, that the actual supply is on the high side of where it needs to be. And it's tough to tell if this is if what this actually means, because is this a market by market thing? Is it something where we still are way less, but because people are still kind of sitting on their hands and not buying when they actually want to purchase a home, but they just are waiting? Maybe the supply of inventory being higher is a little misleading, that it's not because the demand's not there. It's just that the demand is made up of people who are just kind of waiting on the sidelines right now. So I don't know. I feel like it might be a little misleading, but maybe not. Maybe the supply has started to catch up with all the development that's happened over the last couple of years.
Well, if you look towards the end of the article, what they're essentially saying here is look at the context. So yes, that current month supply at 9.3 seems high, but so there's this giant but word that goes in there, and that's the existing home inventory that is not turning, and it is really really low, below 3 months. And so if you blend those and you take those together and you say, okay, let's take our new and existing single family inventory. Now we're looking at a 4.4 month supply. So that's telling us, okay, we're actually underbuilt still, like we thought. If interest rates free up and now we've got some existing inventory that can turn, maybe that number changes very quickly. But at least for now, I think we're still underbuilt, but we have to contextually understand, hey, that number, that 9.3 month supply on new homes would seem normally like a big problem, unless you use the context of blending that with the existing inventory, and then it seems about right. Now, all things considered, we have to look at that 9.3 month inventory. That is not homes ready to move in. That is homes that someone could go pay for in various stages, either designed and entitled and not built. You could buy that one, or the one that's partially done. You could also buy that one, or the one that's completely done. You can move in tomorrow. You could buy that one. So all three of those phases are included in that number. So I think contextually, I think we can say we're pretty safe and we're in a good spot. But I think a lot of home builders are going to be watching this pretty closely, because if they were sitting on a bunch of inventory and then interest rates suddenly dropped a full point, and now you've got existing supply picks up dramatically, they could be sitting on a bunch of inventory they couldn't turn loose of. But I don't see that happening. The nice thing about this is that it's going to be a very slow change, right? We're going to move interest rates a quarter point at most, and all of these things are going to have plenty of time for a builder to look at the numbers, make sure they're not using old data, of course, but as long as they're using current new data, they can adjust and be able to kind of work this thing to their advantage, I think.
Yeah, it still feels like the common range that you see from even the National Association of Home Builders is somewhere between 1 and 2 million units. Seems to be the number that you see. A couple of years ago, you were seeing numbers of people talking about 5 million units. Being short 5 million units, and I think now it feels like the number is somewhere between 1 and 2 million, but it still feels like a lot needs to change on. Um, and this kind of goes to the article we covered last time a couple weeks ago related to the NAHB's steps, plans of what needs, some of the things that need to happen to help, facilitate more activity in the especially in the single family, build space and everything. And until some of those things start to happen and we see a better climate for people to purchase homes, you're not going to see a lot of change in this particular space with people actually buying up homes and getting into the market to actually buy anything. I think you're still going to see more of the rentals that people are going to be getting into, just whether it's they can't afford it, they can't afford the down payment, or what's going to happen there. So again, all this stuff is just continually, as we continue to talk about these topics, week over week, we're going to see things slowly move in one direction or the other, and kind of see how, um, you know, and especially as we get toward the fall, as we talked about, and we get into, the political season that we're in, what are people going to be addressing as far as like local and state level um, changes that could happen that would be beneficial to the building climate in particular states and everything as well. So it's going to be interesting to see it play out.
Yep, I'm with you. I think it's going to be very interesting for us to track this, and that's what I love about doing this show is that we're seeing this information and we're able to talk about it and track it every couple of weeks. So this is a number that the how many months supply I think is something that we should make a note to track, and every so often bring that up and see how it's adjusting.
Yep, I think that's a great idea. All right, well, that is the final episode, or not final episode, the final article of this episode. So, with that said, we will talk to you guys next time. Thanks for joining.
See ya.